Alright guys, here we are for another lecture. It feels like it's been a while. I know we haven't had a lot going on, but hopefully we'll get everything straightened out here in a minute. Straighten out, I don't mean that, but let's go ahead and get rolling, because one of the things we're going to be talking about primarily today is the idea of tensions. Now, if you guys remember back during, I think it was Wednesday of last week, I asked you guys to read a section from Paideia about some of these research things, and one of the things it talks about on page 54 was the idea of exploring attention. And it's only like, no, it's not page 54, it's, sorry, I gotta look here. It's page 50, sorry, so this is Paideia 17, page 50, if you were wondering. I'm sure all of you were just super curious to know what that was. But it only gives two short paragraphs about what exploring attention is, and I thought that was a bit underwhelming and not very useful, because this idea of tensions is what's going to be driving, or hopefully driving, some of your research, because it's out of this that you're going to find interesting questions that are worth answering, that you're not just, sitting there peddling through, internet pages and articles and things like that, looking for just keywords and trying to slap together some things at the last minute. Not that I've never done that myself, or that you might not need to do that. But knowing this, even if it does come down to the last minute sort of stuff, this is going to help you find things that are more useful. Again, hopefully it's not procrastinated, but let's be realistic. That's going to happen at some point. Whether it's this semester or later on, this is a good tool to help regardless of whenever I should say, you start writing stuff. So what exactly is a tension? Well, a good thing to note is a tension is whenever two or more things are in conflict. C-O-N-F-L-I-C-T. Are in conflict. Or when they should be in conflict. Now, it's a very, very broad definition of it, but this is basically one of the things to be looking for if you're looking to do critical reading of a source, is you're looking for things within that text that seem to be butting heads, that don't make implicit sense, because taking anything at face value is not always necessarily a good idea, but tensions gives you a way to try to systematically go about looking at that, looking for things that don't work. So what are some examples of some tensions when you're looking at things in literature? No, not in literature, but just some things that are out there. Because what a tension does... actually, before we get on to the examples, let's say a bit more about what a tension does. Is whenever you're reading something, and something jumps out at you, and you say, well, that doesn't seem quite right. I wonder what they mean by that. Or looking at a text and something doesn't seem complete, there's something missing. It's identifying those points in anything, really, whether it's a story, whether it's a paper, whether it's a conversation, where there is one thing is being presented, but there's other things that need to be explained. Where you're reading it, and then the surface reading doesn't seem to match up with either context or some other things that are going on. We'll get into more of how to identify these. But attention is whenever you're reading or engaging with anything, and there are two or more parts of it. No, I shouldn't even say that. Not even two parts. There can be just one part that doesn't seem to make sense, or that seems strange. Attention is something that is kind of a flare when you're looking at it. That when you're reading through a work, you're wondering what exactly is going on. You're curious. So to use some examples going back, is attention in going back to two short stories I read. One, Bounty Rain, and the other one was Everything is Green. Is that called? Everything Here is Green? I think that's what it was called. Anyway, but for those two, we were talking about a couple different things. Now, Bounty Rain was about that one guy who had to go out on a hit job, and we find out he killed his friend. Looking back at the story, it's one question that's worth asking is, did he have to do this? Did he really? I mean, once he realized it was his friend, I think we would all, if we were in a similar situation, might have reconsidered, possibly shooting him or carrying out the job. Why doesn't that happen in the story? Why doesn't he put down the rifle? Why doesn't he walk away? Why doesn't he do something else? The other thing is, in Everything is Green, David Foster Wallace story that we read, is when he's talking to Mayfly and realizing that she's a lot younger than him, and there's a lot of, well, tension, not to be too on the nose about it, but there's a lot of tension between them where they're in different areas of life and trying to unravel why that is. There's an anxiety in that piece, and we're wondering where it's coming from and why it exists. The tension is something that doesn't seem quite right. Something within a story, or not even necessarily a story, but something in a text. So going back to our Unit 2 thing, a text just being anything that you're looking at critically. Very, very broad term, but this can apply to a lot of broad different topics. So something in a text to be resolved. That's a much better definition of it. It's when if you're reading something and something doesn't seem quite right, or you're interested in how it unfurls, or maybe the author doesn't seem to be doing a very good job of demonstrating what this is, or is oversimplifying it. We'll get into that here in a second. But that's basically what attention is. And this is a key point if you're trying to read something or engage with anything critically. It's looking for those parts that don't seem to make sense. Alright, but let's get on to some quick examples of everything. Right. So one of the first ones that came up is a good example of what's going on. We'll go through these as quickly as possible. I promise we won't spend too terribly long on this. But one of the things is, there are people who have jobs in fossil fuels. Right? It's a good, solid industry. Probably you have a pretty good career there if you had that. But, there are efforts by, environmentalist groups. There's the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, where both of these, what this provides, jobs, is a good thing. And protecting the environment, that's a good thing, probably. But there seems to there's a trade-off between the two of these. You can't have one without sacrificing something of the other, or you can't have more of one without sacrificing some of the other. And so it comes down to, well, is there a way to mitigate or resolve this tension that's going on here? See what's going on and how we can fix it. Going off of that this isn't just a straight for or against argument, because that's one thing that a good tension, if you're paying enough attention, does not let you do. For and against positions are not valid. The reason why is because they tend to oversimplify things. I'm not saying that you can never argue I'm not saying, you can't ever argue for or against things. There are obviously reasons why we should do some things and reasons why we shouldn't do other things. But this cannot be the only thing that you have in your argument. Because then you exclude other things that, while they make the position more complicated, such as the fact that these are not sometimes mutually exclusive, or giving up one means hurting the other, because you want jobs, you want people to have a livelihood, but you also have to care about, what we're doing here, how we're taking care of our place and things like that. It's not either or. There's a gray area we have to go exploring, and a good tension always asks you to explore that gray area more. If something seems clean-cut and straightforward, don't believe it. Go looking for the nuances in between. I guarantee you that they're there. And that's not necessarily that everything has to be, have overly complicated. But life is very complicated. And reducing things to just either or, well, that's not thinking critically now, is it? But anyway, I'm spending too much time on this. Let's go ahead for another example. We'll just cut it off at this one, and then we'll move on to another thing about how to identify some tensions. One of the other things is, another good example is, well, actually, since we're running a little short on time, we'll keep it a little bit short, so I'll put this one up here, and I won't go spend as much time on it. But IMR, which is infant mortality rate, for the number of children who die just after birth. This is usually a really good statistic for judging how developed a country is, how well they take care of mothers, how good their personal hygiene is, how good their healthcare system is. Infant mortality rate is a really good metric of that. But interestingly enough, if you compare, say, the US's versus that of Cuba, Cuba is significantly, I think you can make the argument, is significantly less developed. That's not just that's not a detriment against anything. Just for their infrastructure and the political turmoil that they haven't had the opportunity to build up as much as we do. But interestingly enough, their IMR is lower than ours. So that doesn't seem right, does it? Is that this wealthy, really powerful first world country over here just trying its darndest, but if this other country over here is managing to make, keeping more children alive than we are, then what's going on? If you're curious about what that is, it's not that simple as to why that's going on. There's a reason why this is higher, and it's not because necessarily their healthcare system is better, not that ours is terrific either. But there's an interesting thing going on there, because you wouldn't think that this is true, and it isn't necessarily. But it's more complicated than that. And I'll leave it at that, because we don't have much time for going on, and I don't want to have this lecture go to infinity and beyond. Alright, let me make sure I'm staying in frame here. Alright, so what are some other things? What are some ways that you can identify tensions? So ways... Let's just put ID. Tensions. So we'll go through this as quickly as we can, because I want to keep this as short. Right. First one is there any part of this topic the author isn't talking about? For instance, one thing is if you're talking about gun violence in the United States, and a lot of the times that seems to be the only time in mainstream news that mental health comes up, is whenever a victim of that, or never, not a victim, but whenever a perpetrator of a mass shooting or something going on, one of the first typical things to be referenced is mental unwellness. So, in you're talking about that issue, why is that the only time the mental health is a concern? Now, obviously, if it's a risk to anyone else, sure, but that shouldn't be the limit of when we're talking about that. And vice versa, if you're talking about mental health, and the only thing that is talked about is just the relationship between that, or potential relationship between that and gun violence, there's a lot they're skipping over here. The author isn't talking about all the other facsimiles and all the other problems that go along with dealing with mental health in this country. So that's a way to look for tension, is trying to find that thing. Is there something the author is leaving out? Is it for and against? Is it as simple as they're presenting it? Which is one of the other things looking at this. Well, I'll just put this. Never trust a door that just opens and shuts. Now, what I mean by that is whenever something seems incredibly straightforward and, that's obviously what that is, you're more likely to... Well, it's most likely more complicated. I'm probably repeating myself several times in the course of this video, but anytime something seems simple, that's usually a red flag that there is a tension or something that's being ignored there. That's because life is just intricate and there are a lot of moving parts with anything. It's easier to oversimplify things, to make it an open and shut case, where it was this, that, and then we're done. Whenever you see that, odds are there's something that's not being talked about. It's more complicated, it's more nuanced. And that should push you to try to consider what are those things they're leaving out and why are they leaving it out. And I'm not necessarily implying that every time you find a gap in an article it's because someone is deliberately eschewing some issue or other. It might be they haven't thought about it. But why haven't they thought about it? That might be a good question. So here, that's one other thing. Let's see here. Another one, and this is what is up on Paideia. So I'll just put that. This is the Paideia 17 one that they're looking at. Is because we talked about in Unit 2, a lot about, your audience and the various appeals, how you're going to try to get them on your side, or at least consider what you have to say. Now, I don't think I need to say that sometimes whenever you're reading something, it doesn't quite come across as you think the author intended. So there is what the author was striving for, and then there's what you as the audience got. And sometimes they're at cross purposes. Sometimes they're not the same. Where they're trying to be funny, you were insulted. Or where they're trying to come across as informed, you don't understand it. or they're trying to give full detail and it gets confusing. And that's one other place to look for attention, is to consider what was the author trying to do and what did you actually receive, and why was there a disconnect, why didn't it work? And that can lead you to some interesting questions about the author, about where you came from, about the nature of whatever the text you're looking at is, how it works, what was considered, what was its purpose. So that's one of the things to look at when you're trying to find tensions. Alright. And the last one is just what other perspectives can we consider when looking at this? If you're, I don't know, just with a lot of the things that are going on, I've been looking at a lot of the political scene as it's been unraveling of late. And we'll just use kind of a stereotypical example. If you're considering things as either, Republican or Democrat, that's not a lot of options. And there's usually a lot more, nuance with each of us when we come down to it. I doubt there's a single person out there who agrees entirely and completely and utterly with absolutely everything one of those parties says one way or the other. I could be wrong, but I'm willing to bet a lot of us have like a yes, but and position, where it's like, yes, I agree with most of those things, or maybe just some of those things, but not all of them. Where it's a mixture, that it's a gradient is a very common description for this sort of thing. What are the other ways to go about framing it? And not just like for political issues, if you're talking about, looking at any kind of problem. The issues I asked you guys to look or to do research for in this unit, and what we'll be looking at when we go to Unit 4. So that are some couple of things about tensions. I hope this was sort of helpful. We'll be getting into this more as we get closer to Unit 4, which is going to be next week. Wow, we're already at Unit 4. That's kind of scary. But hang with me. We'll try to make this work. I just wanted to get some things on your guys' mind while we still have the chance. There is no reading for Wednesday, just the normal quiz and the normal word of the day. Alright, I'll see you guys next time.